He was the man who knew where the mountains hid their secrets. A veteran ranger, season after season, who never failed to return from a short patrol. On July 21st, 1996, James Randy Morgenson pinned a note to his cabin door. "I'm going on patrol." Back on the 24th. He walked into the high country, and for 5 years, the Sierra kept its silence. By the summer of 1996, Randy was 54 years old, and in his 28th season as a backcountry ranger in Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks. That kind of tenure was unheard of. Rangers often rotated posts or moved on to administrative roles, but Randy kept returning to the same high country. He wasn't there to climb the ladder. He was there to live among the peaks. Colleagues described him as the wise man of the High Sierra. He could read the weather by the way clouds built on the western horizon. He could glance at a slope and tell you where the avalanche danger was greatest. He knew which patches of late summer snow were solid enough to cross, and which ones could swallow a leg whole. To him, the mountains weren't an obstacle course. They were a conversation. His life followed the rhythm of the park. In spring, when the last snows receded, he helped repair trails torn up by winter storms. Summer brought endless patrols, long treks across jagged ridges, conversations with hikers at remote passes, rescues when things went wrong. Autumn meant inspecting the land as it prepared for hibernation, noting what would need work the following year. He had done this for nearly 3 decades, and the land seemed to accept him as one of its own. Randy's cabin stood near Bench Lake, a tiny doubloon at about 9,500 feet. The structure was simple, no more than what a man needed to sleep, cook, and take notes. Solitude was not a burden here. It was part of the job. Days often passed without seeing another person. From that outpost, he could launch into patrols that took him across remote stretches few visitors ever glimpsed. He was often alone for days, sometimes weeks. To many, that would have been unbearable isolation. But Randy thrived in it. He was not just a ranger, but a steward, someone who saw his work as part of a greater trust. The wilderness, in his eyes, was both fragile and eternal. His patrol notes showed a meticulous mind. He recorded trail conditions, the state of backcountry campsites, interactions with hikers. Yet colleagues said he also had a poet's heart. Around the fire, he would quote lines from authors who wrote about wilderness, or tell stories of the Sierra Nevada as if the mountains themselves were old friends. He was deeply respected. Younger rangers saw him as a mentor, someone who could teach them the unspoken skills, how to stay calm in a lightning storm at 12,000 feet, how to pace your breathing when carrying an injured hiker out of a canyon, how to navigate when maps failed you. But Randy was not a myth. He was flesh and blood, a man in worn boots, carrying a weather-beaten map, with a laugh that had cut through the stillness of an alpine morning. Those who knew him best described a mix of qualities: gentle with people, fiercely protective of the land, occasionally stubborn in his opinions. He had strong convictions about what the wilderness meant and how it should be preserved. Behind the reputation, there was also a man with his own struggles. Life in the backcountry gave Randy purpose, but it also demanded sacrifices. His marriage had gone through turbulence, and his devotion to the mountains often came at the cost of long absences from home. Friends noticed that, in his later years, he carried a certain heaviness beneath the calm exterior. Still, his commitment to the job never wavered. When hikers or colleagues spoke of him, they didn't describe someone reckless or careless. Quite the opposite. He was a ranger who knew the dangers better than anyone else. If he warned you about a crossing or told you to wait out a storm, you listened. That was why his disappearance felt like an earthquake in the National Park Service. A rookie vanishing would have been tragic, but explainable. But Randy, the one who knew every trail, every risk, every way the Sierra could trick you, for him to disappear without a trace was not just alarming, it was unthinkable. To understand why Randy's absence struck so deeply, you have to understand how seamlessly he fit into the mountain's rhythm. He was an outsider venturing into a hostile place. He was part of the cycle. He greeted each season like an old companion. Spring meant rising rivers and dangerous crossings. He respected them, waited for their moods to settle. Summer meant hikers. Some experienced, many not, wandering into situations they couldn't handle. Randy was often their safety net, appearing when someone was lost, injured, or on the verge of panic. Autumn meant solitude again, as the mountains emptied and snow began its slow reclaim. Colleagues often joked that he didn't just patrol the park. He belonged to it. It was his parish, and he its quiet pastor. That's why, in July 1996, when days stretched past without word from him, the shock hit like a lightning strike. Rangers are trained to expect the unexpected. Radios fail. Plans shift. But Randy? He was too seasoned, too careful, too reliable for silence to linger. The Park Service felt the weight immediately. A missing hiker is one thing. A missing ranger is another. But a missing ranger with nearly 30 years of experience, who knew the land as well as anyone alive, that was a nightmare no one thought they'd face. The trust placed in him was immense. Hikers trusted him with their safety. Colleagues trusted him with their morale. Supervisors trusted him with the wilderness itself. And so, when Randy vanished, it wasn't just a loss of man, it was a loss of certainty. Because if he could disappear into the mountains without a trace, then what chance did anyone else have? The story of Randy Morgenson's disappearance begins here, with a man whose life was so intertwined with the Sierra Nevada that his absence was not just a personal tragedy, but a riddle. His cabin by Bench Lake still stood, solitary against the peaks, like a punctuation mark left behind by someone who had simply walked out the door. The questions that followed would consume colleagues, investigators, and family for years. What happened to the ranger who knew every danger, who respected every rule of survival? How does a man so in tune with the wilderness vanish so completely? The High Sierra, for all its beauty, holds its secrets well, and in the summer of 1996, it held one of its deepest. July 21st, 1996. A quiet Sunday in the high country of California's Sierra Nevada. For most, it was just another summer day in one of the most remote corners of Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks. For Ranger James Randall Randy Morgenson, it began like countless days before, routine, almost ordinary. Inside his small cabin at Bench Lake, Randy scrawled a note, pinned it to the door, and prepared to leave. The handwriting was matter-of-fact. The kind of message rangers left to keep supervisors and fellow patrols informed when radios couldn't be trusted. It read, in essence, "I'm going on patrol. Back on the 24th. It was short, deliberate, unremarkable. The kind of note no one would have thought twice about at the time. For nearly 3 decades, Randy had done the same thing. Walked out of his cabin into the granite wilderness with his pack, his maps, and his deep knowledge of the High Sierra. And every time before, he had come back. This time would be different. When Randy stepped away from his cabin that morning, he carried the tools of his trade. His backpack, field gear, and the quiet confidence of a man who had survived countless patrols in terrain that chewed up the careless. He was 54 years old, trim from years of hiking, but seasoned, cautious, deliberate. He was supposed to be back by July 24th. That gave him 3 days to check on conditions, monitor hikers, and move through a section of the park. 3 days was a standard patrol. Not long enough to cause concern, not short enough to seem unusual. His colleagues assumed he would cover a loop to the canyons and ridges, perhaps heading toward the Window Peak drainage, a rugged area that demanded an experienced ranger's eye. The land itself was deceptive, breathtaking to those who saw only the blue lakes and snow-draped peaks, but unforgiving to anyone who misread it. Sheer granite walls cut through valleys like cathedral walls. Creeks swelled with snowmelt, hiding holes that could trap a leg or sweep a body downstream in seconds. Snow bridges, appearing solid to the eye, could collapse under a single step, swallowing a person whole. This was the landscape Randy walked into, and he knew its dangers better than anyone. The first day passed. Then the second. By the third, when the 24th arrived, there was still no word. Radios in the backcountry were unreliable. Signals often bounced off ridges or died in deep canyons, so colleagues weren't alarmed right away. Randy had missed radio check-ins before, and it was easy to imagine his equipment failing, or him choosing a route that kept him out of range. But by the evening of July 24th, unease began to creep in. Rangers are accustomed to unpredictability, but Randy's habits were consistent. He left notes. He kept his word, and he was rarely casual about schedules. When July 25th arrived and still there was no sign, concern hardened. On July 26th, 5 days after he had left his cabin, the Park Service made a decision. Randy Morgenson was officially missing. What followed was one of the largest search and rescue operations in the history of Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks. Teams mobilized quickly. Rangers who had worked beside Randy for years strapped on their packs and headed into the backcountry, retracing routes he was known to favor. Helicopters were dispatched to scan the high ridges, circling over canyons that swallowed sound and light. Volunteers joined in, including seasoned hikers and climbers familiar with the Sierra. Even the National Guard contributed manpower to the effort. The searchers spread out across some of the most rugged terrain in North America. They combed boulder fields, crawled into alcoves, checked beneath snow patches that lingered deep into summer. They scanned alpine meadows for signs of a tent or a fire ring. Dogs were brought in, noses low to the ground, try and catch the faintest trace of scent. Still nothing. The Sierra Nevada does not give up secrets easily. The sheer scale of it dwarfed the search effort. Randy's patrol area covered hundreds of square miles of remote backcountry, much of it without trails. Drainages dropped sharply into shadowed ravines. Waterfalls cut deep into the granite, hidden from above. Snowmelt-fed torrents that could erase footprints in minutes. Helicopters scanned ridgelines, but from above, the ground was a patchwork of rocks, trees, and shadows. Anything human-sized had vanished into the landscape. Searchers on foot faced treacherous conditions. Unstable talus slopes, steep inclines, and icy streams. Every step carried risk. Even with dozens of people searching day after day, the land remained silent. Not a scrap of fabric, not a dropped piece of equipment, not a single clue that pointed to where Randy had gone. For his colleagues, the search was personal. They weren't just looking for another missing hiker. They were looking for one of their own, a man who had trained them, who had guided them through storms, who had led rescues for countless others. The hope that they might find him injured but alive kept them pushing deeper into the wilderness. Even as the days dragged on, every night, the campfire conversations grew heavier. How could a man with Randy's experience vanish so completely? Rangers who knew him best insisted he would never take unnecessary risks. He wasn't the type to wander off-trail without reason, and he knew the dangers of snow bridges and swollen creeks. But as the search stretched into its second week, hope began to dim. No matter how carefully they mapped his possible routes, no matter how many areas they scoured, the result was the same: nothing. By early August, the official search began to wind down. Resources were stretched thin, and there was no sign, no trail, no clue, no trace. For many, it was unthinkable. A man who had spent almost 30 years guiding others through the wilderness had simply disappeared into it. Theories began to surface. Some whispered that he might have slipped on a snow bridge and been swallowed into an icy creek. His body carried downstream and hidden under snow and rock. Others suggested a fall from a hidden ledge or a slide into one of the countless drainages that carved through the park. Still others wondered if something darker had happened. If perhaps foul play was involved, though there was little evidence to support it. And there were quieter, more painful speculations. Randy had been carrying the weight of personal troubles. Could he have walked into the mountains, not intending to return? None of it felt right. None of it matched the man they knew. By the time the last search crews pulled out, the Sierra had already begun reclaiming the season. Late summer storms swept across the peaks, dropping new snow on the high ridges. Streams surged again, making crossings treacherous. The mountains had swallowed Randy Morgenson, and no one knew how or why. The note on his cabin door, ordinary, routine, almost forgettable, had become the last words anyone ever saw from him. And in the silence that followed, the mystery only grew larger. Because when the most experienced ranger in the park vanished without leaving so much as a footprint, it raised a terrifying question. If Randy could disappear in the Sierra, then who among us was ever truly safe in those mountains? When a ranger disappears, the search is never just a matter of procedure. It is personal, bone deep, and relentless. These were not faceless rescuers scouring the Sierra in the summer of 1996. They were men and women who had eaten beside Randy Morgenson, who had traded stories of storms and lightning strikes with him around fire rings, who had followed his lead when lost hikers needed saving. To them, Randy was more than a colleague. He was a living embodiment of the Ranger's code. Now, that code demanded they search every canyon, ridge, and shadow grove until their legs gave out. The early days of the search were charged with urgency. Teams spread out like spokes from a wheel, each assigned to a sector of the vast backcountry Randy patrolled. Helicopters lifted off at dawn, blades thundering over valleys carved by ancient glaciers. Searchers clambered across talus slopes, those unstable seas of loose granite that shift and groan underfoot. Some crawled along cliff ledges, peering into chasms where a single misstep could mean death. Others waded knee-deep into icy streams, scanning for clothing or gear snagged in the current. Everywhere they went, they carried the weight of familiarity. Randy had taught them how to navigate these very obstacles. He had described the dangers of meltwater undercutting a snowfield, the way a bridge of ice could appear solid yet collapse under one wrong step. He had shown them how to read the rock and the water, how to spot traces of life in a wilderness designed to erase them. That knowledge only deepened the strangeness. How could a ranger who knew every trick of survival simply vanish without leaving a trace? Search dogs sniffed at boulder fields and stream banks, circling and whining when the scent dissipated into the hot summer air. Aircraft crews scanned from above, eyes darting across the mottled landscape of rock, pine, and shadow. Radios crackled constantly with updates, false alarms, and calls to regroup. Every day ended with weary men and women returning to base camps empty-handed, faces drawn tight with frustration. As the days stretched into weeks, the energy of the search began to turn. The initial determination gave way to exhaustion. The Sierra Nevada is not just vast. It is hostile to hope. A body can disappear into a ravine, slip beneath a torrent, or rest hidden beneath a snowfield until thaw of another season. Rangers know this. They had told grieving families these truths before, when searches for lost hikers ended without recovery. But applying those truths to one of their own was unbearable. By the second week, the official search had logged thousands of man-hours. Ledges had been checked twice, cairns inspected for signs of disturbance, drainage lines combed by men roped together for safety. Crews had probed creeks with poles, searching for voids beneath snow bridges. Still, the Sierra yielded nothing. Not a scrap of fabric, not a boot print in the dust, not a broken branch. It was as if Randy had stepped into the wilderness and the land had closed over him without a ripple. On August 6, 1996, the search was suspended. The decision was wrenching but inevitable. Crews were exhausted. The danger of keeping rangers in treacherous terrain without result grew harder to justify. The helicopters, the dogs, the foot patrols, all were called back. The backcountry fell silent again. That silence was unbearable. For the rangers who had known Randy for years, leaving the mountains felt like betrayal. They had combed the country for 2 weeks, but many insisted they had only just begun. In their minds, Randy was still out there, waiting to be found. Yet policy dictated otherwise. Without evidence, without fresh clues, the Park Service could not justify continuing a massive search indefinitely. And so the Sierra kept it secret. But in the vacuum of silence, speculation began to take root. Some whispered the simplest explanation, that Randy had broken a leg deep in the backcountry, unable to move, exposed to freezing nights that can kill even in midsummer. Others imagined a boulder dislodged high above him, tumbling down and striking without warning. A single blow could have ended everything before he had time to cry out. Still others pointed to the countless streams of Sierra, undercut by meltwater, their surfaces deceptive. Perhaps Randy had stepped onto a snow bridge, only to be swallowed into the torrent below, his body carried downstream to a place no one could reach. Every theory had merit. Every theory carried a kernel of possibility. One detail, however, gnawed at those who knew him best. His revolver remained locked in his cabin. Standard issue for Rangers in the 1990s. It was not something a man like Randy would forget. The fact that it remained behind suggested one thing. He had not expected danger from another person. Whatever fate he met, it likely came from the mountains themselves. Yet others looked beyond the physical hazards. Randy's personal life was under strain. His marriage, once steady, was faltering. Friends had noticed a melancholy in him in the months before his disappearance, a heaviness in his voice when he spoke about the future. Could his vanishing have been intentional? Could a man so intimately bound to the wilderness have chosen to let it claim him? Those who knew him rejected the idea. Randy was a man of the Sierra, yes, but he was also a man of duty. He had endured hardships, but he had never abandoned responsibility. He had rescued too many lost hikers, guided too many to safety, to willingly become a mystery himself. To them, the thought that he might have staged his disappearance was an insult to his legacy. But in the absence of evidence, every possibility had room to breathe. Theories multiplied in ranger stations, in newspaper columns, in the quiet speculation of locals. Some wondered if foul play could be involved, though the locked revolver cast out. Others thought perhaps he had stumbled upon something or someone in the backcountry that led to an unforeseen confrontation. Without a body, without evidence, nothing could be confirmed or dismissed. The press circled the story with fascination. The Los Angeles Times noted the sheer irony. One of the most experienced rangers in Sierra Nevada, a man who had taught countless others how to survive, had vanished without leaving so much as a broken twig. To the public, it seemed almost mythical, the mountains devouring their own protector. For his colleagues, the silence that followed the suspension of the search was heavier than the granite peaks themselves. Camps grew quiet. Trails once filled with searchers fell empty again. Rangers returned to their patrols. But each footfall carried the echo of the man who was missing. They passed cairns he had built, trails he had cut, meadows where his laughter once carried on the wind. Every corner of the park bore his imprint, but not his presence. Weeks passed, then months. By autumn, snow began to return to the high country, sealing the backcountry under its icy shroud. If Randy's body lay somewhere out there, it would be entombed until another summer thaw. Rangers knew the truth. The Sierra does not yield what it does not choose to give. And so the disappearance of Ranger Randy Morgenson slipped from active crisis into lingering mystery. The official search was over, but the questions only deepened. How does a man vanish so completely in a landscape he knew as well as his own skin? Was it accident, miscalculation, or something darker? The Sierra Nevada is not a land that yields easily to human curiosity. Its granite spires rise without warning. Its glaciers carve valleys that swallow sound, and its ridgelines shift in storms that move like living things. To those who walk its trails, the mountains are both sanctuary and trap, majestic, yet merciless. For Randy Morgenson, this paradox had defined his life's work. He knew that in the Sierra, the difference between awe and disaster could be a matter of inches, a single misplaced step on stone that has been eroding for millennia. Years after his disappearance, the truth of this unforgiving landscape would prove decisive. The Sierra does not forget what it takes. It only hides it, sometimes for months, sometimes for years. Hidden beneath layers of snow and the violence of seasonal runoff are the remains of stories. Boots torn away in avalanches, tents shredded by storms, packs pulled into crevices. In this wilderness, time does not heal. It erases. The Window Peak drainage was one of those erasures. To the casual eye, it was simply another seam in the Sierra, a lonely chute of talus, scree, and meltwater descending into shadow. But for those who knew the range, it was the kind of place where a single miscalculation could seal a fate. The drainage lay northeast of Window Peak, a mountain few visitors ever touched. Unlike popular routes where trails are carved into switchbacks and marked by cairns, this drainage was wild, pathless, a place where only rangers, climbers, or the most determined wanderers would pass. The terrain there was deceptive. Snowmelt carved channels through the rock each spring, reshaping the land year by year. Bridges of ice formed and collapsed without warning. Loose stones, disturbed by thaw, shifted in sudden cascades that could sweep away a man before he had time to cry out. A ranger could walk a slope dozens of times without issue, then return on the wrong day at the wrong hour and find the ground itself had betrayed him. For searchers in 1996, the drainage had been another mark on the map, one of hundreds of such places needing inspection. Teams had trudged through it, scanning rock and shadow, but the Sierra was vast. To search Window Peak drainage once was not to master it. A slip of 10 yards, a misjudged angle, could mean walking past evidence forever hidden by stone. Even with helicopters overhead, Dense rock walls swallowed perspective. What looked clear from the air was treachery on the ground. As the years rolled on after Randy's disappearance, the drainage lay silent. Storms battered the ridgelines, sending new scree into the gully. Winters dropped tons of snow, pressing into layers that melted unevenly, pouring torrents through the ravine in spring. Each cycle shifted the ground, burying some things deeper, exposing others briefly before concealing them again. Rangers who returned to the area over the years saw subtle changes. Channels cutting where none had been, boulders shifted by unseen force, slopes grown steeper with each season's fury. The Sierra has always been a teacher of humility, even to those who spend their lives in its grip. Rock slides erase footprints within minutes. Meltwater carries fabric into crevices where no hand can reach. Snow falls early, concealing an entire season's worth of passage. By the time thaw comes, a trail that once told a clear story has been rewritten into silence. This was the Sierra's way, and Randy had known it well. But even knowledge cannot grant immunity. To live long enough in such a place is to eventually risk becoming part of its hidden ledger. For those who pondered Randy's fate, this was a tragedy, that a man so attuned to the rhythms of the mountains could still be undone by them. It was not sensational, not a story of foul play or conspiracy, though some spin it that way in whispers and speculation. It was, instead, the stark reminder what the Sierra demands from all who dare its heights. Knowledge reduces risk, but never erases it. The mountain is older, stronger, more patient than any human being. The Window Peak drainage became, in retrospect, the embodiment of this truth. Its remoteness meant that Randy's misstep, whatever it was, had gone unseen. Its volatility meant that even as searchers scoured it, evidence might already have been buried or shifted out of sight. To imagine Randy, there was to imagine a man fighting not just injury but isolation, the weight of knowing that no voice could carry to safety, no signal could pierce the granite walls. No one would stumble upon him by chance. Colleagues who had searched the drainage recalled later how impossible it was to cover every inch. A crevice can swallow a body whole, hiding it beneath a cascade of rocks. Meltwater can drag clothing and gear into depths where no daylight reaches. For a ranger as experienced as Randy, the cruelest truth was that he likely recognized this even in his final moments. He would have known the land was closing over him, that the odds of recovery were shrinking with every hour. That knowledge is what sharpened the tragedy into something unbearable for those left behind. This was not a novice lost in the backcountry, nor a reckless wanderer ignoring advice. This was a man who had taught the very dangers that claimed him. He had walked the Sierra for nearly 30 years, reading its moods, protecting others from its ambushes. And still, when his time came, the mountain treated him no differently than any other soul who dared its heights. The High Sierra does not show mercy. It keeps its secrets until it decides otherwise. And in the case of Ranger Morgenson, it would keep its silence for 5 long years. 5 years is a long time for silence to linger. In the half-decade since Ranger Morgenson vanished, the Sierra Nevada had continued its seasonal rhythms. Snowpack in winter, melt in spring, fire in summer, storms in autumn. Rangers carried on their patrols. Hikers came and went, and yet for those who had known Randy, the absence never dulled. His name remained spoken in ranger stations, in hushed conversations at trailheads, in memories shared by colleagues who still walked trails he had once cut. The Sierra had taken him, but without proof. There was no closure, only speculation and an ache that refused to fade. That changed in July of 2001. It began with chance. A crew of off-duty trail workers, moving through the remote drainage northeast of Window Peak, spotted something out of place among the granite and rushing water. At first, it was nothing more than fragments. Bones lie in the drainage, pale against a darker rock. In the Sierra, where deer and bear roam freely, bones are not unusual. But these were different. Human, fragile, out of place in the shadow of Window Peak. The workers froze. Then, recognizing the gravity of what they had found, they marked the site and radioed for authorities. Within hours, rangers arrived to investigate. Word spread quickly. Human remains had been located in the very backcountry where Randy had disappeared. After 5 years of mystery, the mountain was finally speaking. The site was examined carefully, piece by piece. Rangers identified a tattered uniform shirt, weathered by seasons of sun, rain, and snow. The badge still clung to the fabric. The name was faint but unmistakable, Morgenson. Nearby lay a handheld radio, its switch still turned to on, as though Randy had never stopped trying to send word through the static. A backpack was recovered as well, its waist belt still fastened, a haunting detail suggesting that the pack had remained on his body when he collapsed, not removed in preparation for rest. Scattered around the area were other remnants of a ranger's life in the field. Personal effects worn by time and weather, but recognizable to those who knew what he carried. Dental records confirmed the identity. The remains were those of James Randall Morgenson, the ranger who had vanished without a trace in 1996. At last, after years of searching, speculating, and grieving without certainty, his family and colleagues had an answer. Relief washed through the Park Service, but so did a sharper grief. The discovery reopened wounds long scarred over by silence. It was closure, but of the most painful kind. Investigators turned quickly to the question that had haunted the case for years. What happened to Randy in those final hours? The location of the remains offered crucial clues. The window peak drainage was remote, steep, and unstable, a place where snow bridges often concealed torrents of water beneath. The evidence suggested Randy had likely fallen victim to the very dangers he had warned others about. Contemporary reports pointed most strongly to a broken leg, sustained while crossing creek or a snow bridge weakened by meltwater. A leg fracture in such terrain would have been catastrophic. Alone, unable to signal for help, he would have been immobilized in a place where nights plunged below freezing even in midsummer. Injuries compounded by exposure could have claimed him within hours, perhaps days. The positioning of his belongings told a consistent story. His pack, still fastened, implied that collapse had been sudden. The radio, switched on, showed that it attempted to reach out, perhaps desperate for a signal in a granite-choked ravine where transmissions rarely carried. That he remained in uniform, badge intact, only underscored the poignancy. Randy had died as he lived, in service to the mountains, still carrying the tools of his duty. Why had search teams failed to find him in 1996? The answer lay in the unforgiving mechanics of the Sierra itself. Seasonal runoff is powerful, capable of moving boulders the size of cars and burying evidence beneath shifting scree. A body fallen into a drainage might be swept downstream, wedged into a cascade, or covered by rock slides. Snowmelt floods channels unpredictably, carving new routes and concealing others. For years, it seemed, Randy's remains had been pinned or hidden beneath debris. Only the gradual erosion of time had finally revealed them, allowing the trail workers to stumble upon what countless professionals had missed. The conclusion reached by investigators was stark but unsurprising. Randy's death was not the result of foul play, nor conspiracy, nor some darker twist. It was a wilderness accident, as unforgiving as it was ordinary. He had been caught in the same risks that haunted every ranger's patrol. No amount of experience, no depth of knowledge, could shield even a seasoned veteran from the dangers of the Sierra Nevada. For colleagues, the discovery was both a comfort and a torment. The mystery had ended, but in ending it confirmed their worst fears. They had imagined scenarios, clung to faint hopes, even entertained darker possibilities. But the truth was simpler. The mountain had claimed Randy as it claimed others before him. That simplicity did nothing to ease the sorrow. The Park Service held memorials. Rangers spoke of Randy as the wise man of the High Sierra, a mentor who had taught them not just how to survive, but how to see the wilderness with reverence. Visitors who had once been guided by him shared their gratitude. And in quiet moments, those who had scoured the backcountry for him in 1996 replayed their steps in their minds. Had they walked past the very place he lay? Had the sound of their boots echoed near him while he remained hidden beneath rock and water? Those questions gnawed at them, unanswerable but persistent. In the end, Randy's discovery underscored a truth he himself had often spoken. The Sierra is vast, older than memory, indifferent to human presence. It gives beauty freely but demands respect, and sometimes it takes without warning. His death was not sensational, not the product of malice or intrigue, but of that timeless equation, man against mountain, where the mountain does not bend. Yet there was something enduring in what the recovery meant. After 5 years of silence, The Sierra had finally given Randy back. His colleagues could grieve not in abstraction, but with the certainty of his fate. His family could mourn with the knowledge that he had not abandoned them, nor disappeared by choice, but had been overtaken by the wilderness he loved. And though the discovery confirmed tragedy, it also sealed his legacy. Randy Morgenson had remained a ranger until the very end, bound to the land that had defined his life. The Window Peak drainage, once a place of speculation, now bore a heavier weight. It was no longer just another remote crease in the Sierra's face. It was a keeper of Randy's last chapter, the place where the mountains had finally spoken after 5 years of silence. And in that revelation lay the cruelest truth of all, that sometimes even the most experienced ranger cannot outlast the secrets of the Sierra Nevada. The discovery of Randy Morgenson's remains in July of 2001 brought a kind of resolution, but not the kind that heals cleanly. In the wilderness, answers rarely come with sharp edges. They come blurred by snowmelt, softened by time, and whispered rather than declared. For the men and women who had searched for him, who had camped in freezing drainages, scoured talus slopes, and risked themselves on unstable snowfields, the fact that his bones had lain hidden in a place they had passed, perhaps more than once, was both haunting and humbling. The Sierra Nevada had not given Randy back easily. For nearly 5 years, the mountains had kept their silence, as if guarding a secret. When the search was called off in 1996, many believed Randy's body would never be found, that he would remain one of those wilderness mysteries. The ranger who knew every hidden pass and alpine meadow, now claimed forever by the land he loved. That belief made the discovery almost uncanny, as though the mountain itself had decided when to return him. For colleagues, the grief was layered. Randy wasn't just another ranger. He was a mentor, a guide, a man whose entire life was interwoven with the rhythms of the backcountry. To new rangers, he had been a living compass, someone who could glance at a skyline and tell you where the trail would vanish under snow or where water might be found in a dry season. To lose a man like that was to lose not just a friend, but a library of hard-earned knowledge. His passing reminded even the most seasoned that in the Sierra, experience is not armor. It is a tool, valuable, necessary, but still subject to forces of stone, water, and chance. The recovery of his belongings only deepened the impression of tragedy. His ranger shirt, sun-bleached and torn, still bore his name and badge. His radio, batteries long since drained, had been found switched on, as though he had tried to call for help in his final moments. His pack, waist belt still fastened, told its own quiet story. He had not removed it, had not made camp, had not prepared for a long wait. Whatever happened came suddenly. Most investigators concluded that he had broken his leg while navigating the drainage near Window Peak, possibly while crossing a snow bridge over a creek. Injured and unable to move, he likely succumbed to exposure, his body carried and concealed by runoff, wedged into the rocks and hidden beneath years of snowmelt. But in the ranger community, questions remained, questions not conspiracy, but inevitability. How many times had search teams walked within yards of him without realizing? How much of futility was simply the Sierra reminding them of scale? The human being, even one as prepared and respected as Randy, can vanish in its immensity without leaving a trace. Those who had searched carried that weight with them. Some admitted years later that they dreamed of talus slopes and river drainages, of searching endlessly but always coming up empty. His death altered the tone of ranger briefings in Sequoia and Kings Canyon. New recruits learned his story not as a cautionary tale of error, but as a sobering truth. The wilderness is never conquered. Even those who know its moods and patterns can misstep. Experience can sharpen judgment, but it cannot remove risk. The Morgenson case became part of the unspoken curriculum. Something passed along in conversations at trailheads or in the long silences of patrol, when the land itself seemed to echo his absence. The park community honored him in ways both official and quiet. Memorials were held. His name became part of ranger lore. Informally, some began referring to a nearby unnamed peak as Mount Morgenson, a tribute spoken more often in stories than on maps. Hikers who knew his history would pause near Bench Lake, where his cabin had once stood, and remember the man who had lived there season after season, keeping watch over a wilderness that was both his workplace and his sanctuary. Randy's widow, Loisa, carried the deepest burden. Their marriage had been strained before his disappearance, marked by separation and attempts at reconciliation. His death forced her into the dual role of grieving wife and keeper of his legacy. She worked to ensure that Randy was remembered not just as the ranger who vanished, but as the poet, the writer, the man who chronicled the mountains with both reverence and realism. His journals and writings revealed a thoughtful, sometimes melancholy man who understood both the beauty and the cruelty of the wilderness. In one entry, years before his disappearance, he wrote about the Sierra's power to erase human presence without malice, as if he had foreseen his own fate. Among rangers, his story became almost mythic, not because of conspiracy or mystery, but because of what it said about the land they served. The Sierra does not need to hide its dangers and malice. It is indifferent. Rock falls without warning. Snow melts into torrents. A single misstep on granite can end a life, regardless of experience. The Morgenson case distilled that truth. It reminded everyone who set foot in the backcountry that humility is not optional. It is survival. Even today, decades later, hikers still ask about him. His story circulates in campgrounds, ranger stations, and online forums. The questions linger not because the facts are unclear. They are, in the end, tragically straightforward, but because the emotional weight remains. How does a man who gave his life to the mountains become their secret for half a decade? What does it mean to devote yourself to a landscape that, in turn, takes you? These questions keep the story alive in a way few others do. For the public, the Morgenson disappearance is a reminder of the thin line between awe and danger in national parks. For rangers, it is something deeper. It is a scar carried into every patrol, every rescue mission, every reminder given to hikers who underestimate the land. His legacy is not only in the stories told about him, but in the caution embedded in ranger culture after him. In that sense, Randy still walks the trails he loved. The Sierra gave him back in 2001, but only partially. His bones, his belongings, his final resting place were revealed. The man, the laughter, the steady voice on the trail, the wisdom shared by campfire, remains in memory. The mountain's mark is permanent, carved into the way rangers approach their work, into the way they teach, and into the way the public perceives the wilderness. The story of Randy Morgenson is not about an unsolved mystery or a hidden crime. It is about respect for the mountains, for their silence, and for the people who choose to guard them. His disappearance and discovery are woven into the fabric of Sequoia and Kings Canyon, a quiet reminder that even those who know the land best are not immune to its power. In the end, Randy's story is a mountain story, vast, humbling, and unforgettable. The High Sierra kept him for 5 long years. In doing so, it left a mark not only on his family and colleagues, but on the very culture of those who continue to walk its trails, carry with them the lesson that the wilderness always has the final word.